here, Rick Heyland, Neil Longson, and Kurt Gibson. They're going to join us to talk about capital project transformation. So welcome, gentlemen. I'll start with Rick Heyland. He's the EVP of Global Client Solutions. He has been with RLG International for 31 years. RLG is a performance improvement company who has done results-oriented implementation work in the oil and gas industry for more than 30 years. Rick lives in Salt Lake City, Utah with his wife, Cheryl, and their 6 kids and 14 grandchildren. So if you thought you're busy, you go, Rick. Very good. And Rick is accompanied by Neil Longson and Kurt Gibson. They are joining Rick on this presentation and also on the Q&A. They're both vice presidents and business unit leaders with RLG International. Kirk lives near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Neil lives in Atyrau, Kazakhstan. Both are leading RLG's team implementations on their clients' mega projects. Gentlemen, real pleasure to have you here. Very much looking forward to your presentation.
Thanks, Jose. Okay, can you see my presentation?
Yeah, looks great.
Okay, very good. So thank you, Jose, for this opportunity. We're excited, and Neil and Kirk will join me later in the presentation to share some of their thoughts. They're actually on-site leading some of our largest implementations around the world with our largest clients, with large teams, so their insights will be invaluable on this topic. Grateful for this opportunity to talk about capital projects. Let me see if my slide will advance here. Okay, there we go. So 4 things we want to talk about real briefly. One is just a little bit of background very briefly on RLG for those if you have not heard of us before. Then we want to spend the majority of our time talking about some of the lessons learned that we've seen, both our benchmark research and others in major capital projects. And as Jose said, introducing this or closing the last session, the track record hasn't been great, so we're going to share some lessons learned and some how-tos, if you will, 4 strategic ideas on how to change the profile for success of major or mega capital projects. And then I'll ask Neil and Kirk to share some of these success stories that we're experiencing with our clients around the world, and then some Q&A. So first, a little bit about RLG International. We've been a consulting company. We've been in business for over 35 years. You can see some of the industries that we work. The majority of our work today is in oil and gas, upstream, midstream, downstream, and chem. And then this just gives you a little bit of a picture for how large we are, where we work, some of the areas that we're trying to implement excellence in around safety, capital projects, turnaround, operational excellence, etc. Some of our clients, not an exclusive list, but some of our clients that we work with, our largest 4 clients around the world are Shell, Chevron, ConocoPhillips, and Nova Chemical, just to give you an example of that. So as I mentioned, or as Jose mentioned, we do on-site performance improvement work, results-oriented work. And in our experience, we want to share some of our lessons learned around capital projects and how to be profitable and achieve the objectives of these projects. Mega projects, in definition, are projects over $1 billion. Most of them are much bigger than that we're going to cite and share with you today. And the track record hasn't been great. I didn't put the slides in here from the McKinsey studies and the IPA studies, etc. But roughly, depending on the study you look at, we're achieving the objectives approximately 20% of the time in the industry. And as Jose said earlier, that's been a problem for a long time. So there's many people thinking about how we change that. But first, let's understand some of the nature and challenge when you have thousands and thousands of people together and billions of dollars being spent. And you can see the list there. I won't read all of them. Workforce readiness and capability. Jennifer touched on that relative to in general, but that's a huge issue in capital projects, and I'll talk about specifically at the front line. Integration is a massive issue. You've got all these contractors and owner groups and stakeholders involved around the world. And then, of course, the complexity of the interfaces, and we'll talk much more about that. But those are some of the reasons for the challenge and why we're struggling a little bit before we jump to some of the solutions. I love this slide. It's pretty self-explanatory. It's a piece of research by Kay Remington in her book, Leading Complex Projects. But it talks about just the complexity and all these discrete interfaces. And if you were to ask the question about, you know, what one thing could we do to change the curve on success of capital projects, and I think it representative of that quote there, lack of proper and accurate information is consistently seen as the top reason for project failure. And with all these interfaces and all these stakeholders happening, to get the accurate, granular, one version of the truth, not two or three, not contractor owning one, owner owning one, but accurate, granular, one version of the truth could be that one thing to change the profile. So if there's anything, if there's one thing you take out of today's presentation, maybe to think about that as you work together as a team. So this piece of research here is what we see in our last, this is RLG's Insights in our last 20 megas, and most of these over $5 billion, on some of the reasons that we're underperforming. Obviously at the top there, you've got feed quality below average. A lot of times owners are rushing through and not getting very accurate estimates and accurate feed work. We're not bringing in contractors fast enough, early enough, because it is expensive. But our experience is the benefits far outweigh the costs. We're missing deadlines. You know, if you start get behind in engineering already, it's very difficult to get ahead on construction. And then you see kind of the box things that we're going to talk about today, the importance of schedule. You know, in turnaround maintenance, we've got really good at following a P4 schedule, a level 4 schedule in P6. And today in capital projects, we're not. Because of the complexity, we're basically progressing work and what's open and what's available. And we think that the most efficient and productive way is to follow schedule. We're going to talk a lot about in this presentation. We need better leadership. These are $40 billion, $25 billion, $6 billion businesses, and we need the type of leadership necessary to lead that. Not just project experience, but real leadership. We're going to talk a lot about that. The big four we're going to highlight today is really the importance of the right leadership to turn the curve for project success. Making the effort one team, contractor alignment is so critical with the owner group and all the subs including, so this idea of one team, and Kirk and Neil are going to share some experiences around that. Making time for optimization. You know, when you've got thousands of people out distributed on different work fronts, it is difficult to get the front line together to optimize the work, but it is that critical. As good as the engineering has been, there's still opportunities for the front line to optimize 10, 20, 25, 30% on that schedule if we make the time and we have an organized effort around that. So we're going to share some success stories around that. And then finally, to overcome the interfaces and the complexities, a really tight, disciplined operating rhythm. And you can kind of see that on the bottom picture on the right. So those are the four areas we're going to hit hard in the presentation. So first of all, around leadership, and again, this is a breakdown on the chart on the front and where we see the largest gaps in leadership, adequate or below average, and it's coming back to the capability at the front line. These are frontline leaders that are very good at their craft, but ill-trained, ill-prepared with the right information to lead performance at the front line. And we're going to make some high recommendations on what to do there. And you can see that, you know, leaders matter and some of the areas that they matter on along the left-hand side. I won't read all those items, but the point is better leadership is needed. This is a piece of research now by Edward Merrow and his book, Leading Complex Projects, a really, really, really good book. You can kind of see here the importance. Now we're starting to bring together the importance of one team, having all the integrated team in place early and often on a project. You can see on the right-hand side if the leader's not performing leadership tasks. They're in the details and the weeds on management tasks, not listening to all the stakeholders, you have a 33% chance of getting the integrated team, the one team, and we know that that's incredibly important for the success of a project. All the way on the left-hand side of the scale, when the leader listens, when the leader doesn't perform management tasks, but true leadership tasks, you have a 100% probability of having an integrated team. And that's backed by a piece of research on their last 48 mega capital projects. And I'll share more of that research here in a second. So the importance of real leadership, listening, integrating, pulling all the stakeholders together is illustrated there. Same book, same piece of research, kind of pointed a slightly different direction. If you look on the left-hand side, complexity, these interfaces that we talked about by Kate Remington's piece of research there, requires real leadership, not management. And you can see that on the 7 out of the 48 mega capital projects they looked at, the 7 that were successful, the overriding success was the leader and leadership characteristics. And you can see some of those characteristics on the top of that graph: generalist, open personality, high emotional intelligence. When was the last time we hired for emotional intelligence? And a varied experience, not just project experience. And then subsequently on the bottom half of the projects that weren't successful. Now, mind you, in smaller capital projects, a project manager mentality can still be done. You can put your hands and fingers and all around it and be more detailed oriented. It's not recommended, but that's some of the complexity that we're having is, well, on the $100 million project, we were able to do it this way, but on the 5 billion, no longer. And so on the top hand, again, you're looking at leaders that they're focusing on people and cooperation tasks and best practices. That's how you get to successful result. And then of course, the opposite is true. We find still too many times the bottom that they're hired because of their technical skills and their control skills, and it's their way. And the communication skills have to be on a mega capital project, just have to be in the top quartile. And this piece of research illustrates that as well as our own. So this one is an actual success story that Kirk was part of, and a fantastic leader called Chilling Terpstra with Shell. And I'd like, Kirk, can you jump in and just share some of your highlights of one team and
Sure.
Chilling's work here?
Yeah, absolutely, Rick. Thanks. So, transitioning from, of our 4 principles that we put out, the first one is selecting the right leader, like Rick just went over. And what's so critical about that is you have to do that at the very start. You can't, a lot of times projects change leaders, and then it's a little tough to restart the culture of that work site. So what Chilling did that was so good, and he sat down as they were very early, vendor selection even. And they assessed the quality of the people that came up from each vendor that they had. And I'll name names on this one because it was a great success story and they deserve to be recognized. So Chilling sat down with, it was Turner Construction and Jacobs Engineering at the time. And both of those organizations put forth the kind of people that really wanted to be on a one-team site. And they put together an alliance that was based on 4 principles you see there on the slide. The first one was openness. And, that's the transparency we hear about. Here's what Chilling was okay with their suppliers as the owner team. He was okay with the suppliers making a profit, making money. They have to survive too. And that was okay to talk about the business terms, but it was more important that they're engaged in the success of the project. So don't let the transactional nature jeopardize that. Collaborative, they were willing to share risks. They were willing to raise problems and solve them together. Maybe there was someone on the owner team who had more experience than someone on the constructor team, and that person was worth listening to, versus siloing and letting a builder try to solve it all on their own. There was trust. They showed up in service to one another, and that came from, again, selecting the right leader with the right emotional intelligence to get the ego out of the way and say, you have a problem, I'm here to help you, I'm in service to you. And they learned to trust each other. And then empowering. It was delegation and support. They said, okay, you're trusted to go run with this, and we're going to help you along the way. It wasn't delegate and try not to fail. It was delegate and support. And those 4 principles, anytime there was a rift, anytime there was a problem, sure, there was some tension, but they came back to this charter. They referenced, how do we want to behave through this problem right now? And they all, reassessed and they got back together and they showed up as that one team aligned in service to the project. And what was great was when you talked, to a man or woman on the project site, when I was there kind of embedded, they said this was one of the best projects they'd ever been on. It was a mega project. It was just as complicated. It had a lot going on, but they really enjoyed it. And, you know, I could tell a different story of probably, unfortunately, a more common story of a site I was on where after a monthly performance review meeting, I could, you know, everyone leaves the conference room having looked at the exact same slides and the same handouts, and I'll go talk to the owner team and they'll say, oh, this is a disaster. We're going off the rails. The builder doesn't want to work with us on this one. You know, I'm so disappointed. And then I'll go talk to the builder team and they'll say, oh, the project's fine. The owner team, they just don't understand it. They don't have the experience we have. So they left after, you know, and this happened month after month after month. There was not a shared view of project health. And that came from not having this alliance declared up front of this is how we're going to have conversations and work through things together. So, Rick, did I miss anything on that from previous tellings?
No, that's great, Kirk. Appreciate you jumping in there. I think, you know, for the listeners, you know, this is common sense type ideas. It's just not yet common practice. So for us to highlight where it is working and share those learnings across, because as an industry, we all acknowledge that we need to do something better and different. And here is one example of this idea of one team, which everybody's talking about, but they were able to actually execute and work on it. And that doesn't mean that you can't say no, and you don't have to still make tough decisions. But if you do it with the interface or with the understanding that it's open, collaborative, trust, and empowering, and supportive of everybody's best interests, it's a powerful combination. Thanks, Kirk. Okay, next slide. I freeze up. It's not advancing for me. There we go. Okay, so the number one point there was around improved leadership selection, leadership execution of those principles and practices we talked about, including emotional intelligence and being able to handle bad news from different parties and still follow the principles of one team. The second area that we'd like to focus on is making time for optimization activities. And as I mentioned at the front, time you just don't have. And you're given this schedule and you're expected to work it. But we find that if you can carve out in your operating rhythm a weekly time or a time 90 days before a piece of work, Neil will share a couple of examples here, to make optimization activities, it is hugely beneficial for the project. This is our particular tool that we use, approach to optimization. I guess one of the things I'd point you to is this middle, these two charts in the middle of the traditional approach, and the TMP stands for theoretical maximum performance. The idea, and this is the idea of connecting the front line to the schedule and getting them to optimize the schedule. The traditional approach is putting all your inputs from the different parties into a project manager, schedule project manager, and they put together the schedule. Well, what we're asking for after that is the opportunity to then put our fingerprints on that schedule and have each of the subcontractors give an opportunity, now that they see the whole thing together, to optimize it. It's a very powerful opportunity if you can make it. And of course, what we're looking for is not that what happened last time, because on a capital project, you may not know. These are new groups, new parties working together. But what if perfect happened? What if we had all the cranes, all the infrastructure? What could we do? How could we optimize this activity? And when you open up people's minds and thoughts with a clear schedule in front of them, it can be very powerful. And we're going to share some examples of that. This next couple of examples, Neil, do you want to share your insights on this? You were part of this one.
Sure. So we really look at optimizing the schedule as Rick talked about it. It's getting the people that are going to do the work in about 90 days advance of the work that's going to be done, sitting down and saying, with the conditions on the ground, with the equipment and the labor force I have in front of me, is this really the best way I can build it? And this is where your experience of your project managers come out, and they fine tune or tweak that schedule. And I've always seen them be able to prove it. And then it drives ownership and commitment to that schedule, because then it's theirs and they're then pulling against it. And with that, if you then have something come up that's unexpected, you've got float in the schedule and you've been able to still maintain it and come around something if that happens. If you go to the next slide. I guess this was talking about how we do it remotely. Do you want to take the lead on this, Rick?
Yeah, so this is one just actually very recently with a chemical client in Eastern Canada. And with COVID-19, of course, we're having to do a lot more remotely, but this is also automated. And on purpose, you can't see that screen, but let me describe what you're looking at there. On the left-hand side is the actual schedule for the different water systems and sewage systems and everything that they're looking at. And then on the right-hand side is the automated action items that people are committing to. So we facilitated this session in automated software called iObea. It's a piece of our visual management remote work, and they're looking at the schedule, and then everybody can add their action items to improve. And you can see on the right-hand side quite a number of different action items to improve. And the results of the session are quite outstanding. When you give frontline people, as Neil talked about, the opportunity to look at their schedule and optimize it, the results can be dramatic. And you think, well, how can that be? We put all our best ideas into the schedule and out came the schedule. Well, when you give people a chance, now that they see it all integrated and together, and you challenge them with the opportunity to find 10 days, to find opportunities for alignment, when they see it all integrated together, they always come up with amazing ideas. And that's what you see here as facilitated in iObea. So the other point that we really wanted to hit home is the idea of the importance of a disciplined operating rhythm. And all we're talking about there is this cadence of what metrics are reviewed on what regular basis and with whom. So what daily, weekly, monthly cadence do you set up with the right leading and lagging metrics to get one version of the truth in front of the team so that they can really stay on point, hold each other accountable, and be super clear on what the next critical activity is and what the next critical action is to deliver. You can see that it's a high visual management, high inclusion, high involvement, and as Neil already mentioned on the optimization side, this allows a high degree of ownership. When you put a P6 schedule in front of people and just expect them to follow, or just the foreman to then hand out work, it is not as powerful as you can use your visual management tools to get everybody looking at one version of the truth at 6 a.m. in the morning before they go out to understand what the critical path items are to execute and deliver. This is an example. Neil, let me ask you to talk about the next couple of slides on cascading expectations.
Thanks, Rick. So if you look up the lower quadrant, you can see it's the timing of daily, weekly, monthly, and coming up the left-hand side or the vertical side, you'll see that's the more senior leadership coming down towards the foreman. And so you're in the top right corner, you've got your project cost and business reviews that are going on, where you get the senior leaders together that are looking at probably more 90 days on the project. And then when you start getting into the weekly, is that we have these boardwalks where you'd have engineering, construction, quality teams all reporting out on their metrics, how they're doing, so that each group knows where they have to help each other. And so that we use a boardwalk KPI. And the third thing is you're developing what we call a weekly game plan. There's an expectation that every supervisor has a plan for the work that he's going to do a week in advance of the work. And it's not just the schedule, but it's, have I ordered the right supplies, construction, purchase materials, have I set the crane in the right place? It's getting them to think in advance so that they actually can communicate that to the front line. And then daily, that's what they have, is they have a plan for the week. They share it with the crew. They have a daily performance board where they track with the crew. And they really talk about, you know, how did we do yesterday? What are we going to do different today? What are the risks around that work? How do I mitigate those risks? And how do we go have a successful day? And the more successful days you start stringing together drives performance. And it's this operating rhythm of cascading expectations drives results across the project. If you go to the next slide.
Hey, Kirk, yeah. Or Neil, let me just add one insight and then I'll let you share that example that's next. So people always ask us, when's the best time to set up this operating rhythm? And it's not in the middle of construction where you're already behind, or not even in detailed engineering it's in the feed process. This is the time to set up your performance management system, your operating system. What's the one version? What's the metrics we're going to track? And what's the operating rhythm cascade look like? If you can get that all as part of your one team alliance and aligned up in feed or late feed, that just really helps the team get into synchronicity and on one page. Oh, okay. Well, let me turn this one then over to Kirk, because he's got a lot of passion about getting one version of the truth out there and how to describe that so everybody can be on the same page. Go ahead, Kirk.
Thanks, Rick. So if you remember an earlier slide Rick showed, it showed from the survey we did on our 20 mega projects, that 95% of frontline workforces were rated as adequate or sub or below adequate for the work they were in. So that's a huge amount of people that are barely able to do their jobs, is what the survey respondents said. And that graph kind of rubs me the wrong way, thinking of that many leaders blaming the workforce, right? That they're not good enough to make me successful. But that said, let's ask, why aren't they adequate or better at their work? And a lot of it is because they don't really understand the business element of what they're there to deliver. That every decision they make as a frontline leader turns into a number, and it turns into a score that's part of the project health. So every discipline superintendent out there has a slice of the pie that is project health. And very often they just don't understand that. So they may think they're doing a great job or even be rewarded for what they're doing, but it could not necessarily be in the best interest of the project. So what we do is we take that one version of project health that is so important at the top of the house, at the top of the project team, and we try to drive that conversation all the way down to that discipline level at the construction work front. And we do that through visual management, through telling the score visually, through coaching and training these leaders of here's how your decisions turn into numbers, and here's how those numbers aggregate, so they kind of understand they're part of the picture. And you can't quite read it on here, but there's 3 line graphs on the left of this scorecard. And this is shown weekly in front of multi-discipline superintendents. Sometimes general foremen show up there, so you can see those color-coded in the boxes just to the right of the middle of the scorecard. But we look at, okay, for our team, how did we do? And the first graph at the top is how much work did we do? So every week they put in a schedule that says, I'm going to earn you 15, 20,000 hours, whatever their commitment is. And then that's what the green dotted line is. So they look at how much of that work did they get done. We got 75% of it. The next graph in the middle there is how efficiently did we work? And that's the PF, that's the productivity factor that says for every hour, we earned 0.75 hours, or we spent $0.75. So that's pretty common earned value management, CPI, SPI, did we earn the work and how well did we do? But what's missing in that conversation is, did we do the right work? So very often what will happen is, let's say a civil superintendent, his schedule is, I'm going to pour 400 yards of concrete over these 15, 20 foundations on this work front. That's what I'm going to go do. Turns out that work front wasn't available. Turns out a crane was blocking it. A trench was in the way. That something couldn't get it. So they go and they pour the same amount of concrete over different foundations. At the end of the week, just looking at those top 2 graphs, they did the right amount of work. They might have done it efficiently. So it's called a win. But the reality is the work that they put in their schedule, the plan, the commitment they made to the owner team for the work they were going to do didn't happen. And in bulk construction, that's often, well, it's bulk construction, it's okay. And that's true. Maybe there's a reason that they had to go do other work that wasn't in their schedule. But in the end, if you don't sort of hold them accountable to, well, why didn't, do the lessons learned? Why weren't you able to do those foundations? Well, someone dug a trench there. Well, why didn't you work with your civil counterpart to make sure he knew that was the work front you were going to be at? Well, I just didn't. Okay, well, how about next week? I'll do a better job talking that through. So when you measure how much did you do, how well did you do it, and was it the work that was actually in your plan, they start to find ways, and they have to present this, and they have to stand up and present their piece of this in front of their peers. And it brings a lot more integration together. It's a positive accountability. It's not something you don't beat them up for not integrating, but it's part of that. Every week we learn how to do this better, and they get better and better at doing this, and they tend to enjoy the work more and feel that they're tied to the bigger picture. So, Rick, anything further on that one?
No, that's great. Thanks, Kirk.
Yep.
Neil, those that work with operating rhythm and without, what's the difference?
Yeah, this was just an interesting project that we were on. This is commissioning at the time, and we had the electrical group that we're starting, and we also had the instrumentation and control group. And you can see that the instrumentation and control group, had the opinion of, no, we've got this, we have our own way of working. I just have a meeting once in the morning with my supervisors, and I'm good to go. And so the electrical group came in a couple weeks later, and this operating rhythm that we talked about, they came up the learning curve much faster within 2 weeks as opposed to about 6 weeks. But they actually ended up being 70 to 80% more productive towards the end over the 6-month period, just because each supervisor had a plan every day and they had rolled it out across the project and done very well. So it just shows the difference with a strong operating rhythm and one with not. This is an example with a single contractor on a single project.
Thank you. Great example. Okay, so we got a couple minutes left. We wanted to share an integrated story of what good looks like and bringing all these ideas together. Neil, Australia, every day is game day.
Yeah, this was the APLNG project, and it was Origin Energy, which was working on the upstream part of that. And they had this Darren Lockyer, who was a footy champion, who was their safety ambassador and spokesman. And they built a whole brand around that. And they decided to go through this one team approach, so that you had one combined team of the owner and the contractors, that they only had one set of meetings, the one team met. They created this operating rhythm where every single team on every crew, including the ones in the office as well as the ones in the field, had to report out on 4 key initiatives. And it was really around safety, quality, environment, and progress. And every team, they would have had different metrics for those, all reported out across the project on that. And they had conversations every day, and it was even expected that senior leaders did this. What's interesting is when you go back after this project, which was very successful, and you talk to senior leaders, they spent more than 50 to 60% of their time on this, engaging with people in these interactions, working with the team. That was their focus. It really was leadership. If you go on to the next slide, I think they talk about some of the key ingredients that made this successful. So it was common goals of contractors and suppliers. So that was around 4 pillars. And that's the next thing they talk about, is you've got to have, what are the core things that will make the project successful? The creation of work teams. So every single team on the project was created a team. They got to create their own funny names, and they tracked scores, and it was tracked daily. They had the leadership team develop KPIs for each of the individual teams. They would have to be different from a trenching crew versus a commissioning organization. And they then rated themselves every day on A, B, or C. So A, they were above plan, made the site safer. B, it was a normal day, we went as planned. And C, something didn't happen. And safety was the overall driver. If you got a C on safety, the crew got a C for the day. They built a reward system around it where they gave out really big prizes. So the top 2 or 3 teams every month were highly recognized, and they had a recognition program. And they had large screen TVs across the project showing how each team was performing and how they were accumulating for the month. They had this very strong operating rhythm we've talked about, where every team met every morning, and they built this weekly game plan 1 week in advance. And as well as they had leaders come out to the field, share their plans for the week and how they were doing against their scores. There's very clear behavioral expectations on the project. How do I act? How do I show up? Is it okay to bring things up, criticize constructively on how things are being done? And they kept this very important thing that everybody follows these same rules. And then they had coaching, so they kept working to continue to make all of those leaders better leaders across the project. So there was, I think, a relentless commitment of the entire management team from the beginning to act as one team and how to work this way. And the results were incredible. It was an incredible turnaround. They achieved the results that they wanted. I think there was over $75 million in savings attributed to this program. So a really great example of this one team approach put in place by a team that branded it around how they wanted to act and work together.
Very good. So in conclusion, these are the 4 ideas. There's obviously lots of things we need to do to change the curve on successful mega capital projects. But these are the 4 themes that we find are big levers and levers that are doable. One version of the truth, making one team, choosing the right leaders, taking time to optimize, and of course, having a disciplined operating rhythm with the right metrics. So hopefully you've seen value or heard value or an idea that you can take home to your project, either large or small. And Jose, with that, I'll open it up to you and questions.
Very well, great stuff. Great presentation, Rick, Neil, and Kirk. Great teamwork. It's like you showed the one team project approach here, which is fantastic. Great collaborative leadership. So the questions have come in as you're speaking, and I encourage everybody to still continue to submit your questions, and I'll try to get to as many of them as possible. One of the very first questions, and for any one of you, has to do with the impact of the pandemic on projects, but specifically on mega projects. There is a perception that construction has been a little bit insulated from the overall effects that have been devastating in a lot of different segments. And you know, you work with a lot of these organizations, so curious about what you see on the field on the impact of the pandemic on the mega projects.
So I'll jump in to answer this. I think it depends, first of all, in what country you're operating in it, because as you've seen on the news, there's various different stages or waves going through. But we have been on some mega projects in some countries where you have a very high infection rate. And if the community is in other words, they live at home and they travel to the site, then you're dealing with whatever's in the local community. If you're in a camp environment, then you almost have to protect and create that environment. And then you're having to put in all the rules and processes to keep those teams safe. And you have to have the ability to separate them should you have an infection breakout and quarantine them. So much different things need to be considered and much higher impact when you're having to manage in a camp environment.
And on a North American project, the experience I had, it's actually neat to see the team come together, maybe better in the crisis moment than they were on the construction moment. They got together, they put a tremendous amount of protocols in place, they shut down the site, they sanitized, they really invested in finding a way to be successful. A lot of people still working remotely, so everyone, just like we all have, gotten pretty good at Teams and online interfacing. And you know, I guess they're doing a great job of leading by example. Of, you know, it's annoying to wear a mask when it's hot and you're working, and it's annoying to be 6 feet away from everyone all the time, or sit at a lunch table by yourself when you used to sit with your 5 friends for an hour during that lunch break. But the leadership has done a great job on that, and I think that's probably set the tone for the entire workforce on being able to keep going forward in a lower and reducing risk. There's also a tremendous investment they've made. The site that I was familiar with, they brought in their own testing facility and their own physicians to man it, so that everyone who comes in within 4 hours, everyone who is new to the site within 4 hours has a test result. So that's a significant investment. And then they've also had to work quite a bit with the community to demonstrate that they can work safely and do this. So the PR campaign has been significant as well.
Rick, is there any perspective you want to add on that, or you're good?
Just that I think, I think there's a portion of remote work that's here to stay. Everybody says, well, we'll get back to normal. Well, it's going to be a new normal, and that we'll have to be highly optimized and efficient at remote work. And we shared with you a couple of examples of visual management reviews and optimization activities that can be done remotely. So I think, in COVID and even after, I think we're going to have to be much more efficient at not just being able to see and talk to each other, but actually look at a schedule and rip it apart across all the geographies around. So that's here to stay, and we're going to have to become better and better at that rather than waiting for something to pass.
Yeah, and it's interesting because some of the factors that you talk about with respect to mega projects, which is I would consider a stressed out version of a normal project. To a certain extent, we are in a stressed out mode now, and I think the concepts that you mentioned are critical for success may be the same, like the collaborative leadership approach versus the project management approach. Right now, those skills and capabilities become even more important and pronounced. on that, another question that we had to do with someone who is experienced on mega projects, asking a little bit about your approach related to project scoping. And of course, we all know about the optimism bias there exists sometimes related to mega projects. And then the project scoping being a key factor for mega project success. Curious about your work on the scoping end, on the beginning end of that project definition.
Yeah, let me just make a comment then, and maybe Neil and Kirk have one too. Like bringing in the partners, the contractors often and early, even though it's expensive to get scoping and estimating right, is absolutely critical. In that near the end of the FEED stage, when you have all your, if you can, have all your parties at the table to help optimize scope, optimize estimates, makes a factor. I don't even want to guess. It's a huge factor effect on the success of your project. Even though if you look at the dollars, it's expensive to actually bring people in that early. And then, as I mentioned, to get your operating rhythm and your performance management system set can actually help you better collaboration, better scoping early days on the project. So I always coach leaders to often and early. You'll get the payback, I promise, even though it's a little bit more expensive to do so. You'll get it in improved scope, improved ownership, and all the benefits that we know relative to that. Neil, Kirk, anything to add on that? It's a good question.
I think some of the clients we've seen that have had great success is they start a lot more around looking at it. What's the form, fit, function first that has to be done from the engineering design, and bringing Scrum teams in to work through that. And then every single thing beyond that, which may be a nice to have, or will even make it better, has to be financially justified. And they're getting a much leaner and more efficient use of capital by doing it.
And a client we work with pretty regularly, where we were typically brought in during execution, and we would see these things and bring up the lessons learned, and the building team was stuck modifying designs, or then the supply chain was stuck reordering different materials for design accommodations later on, and just caused all this ripple effect. They said, we do need to work earlier, to Rick's point, and we were asked, okay, for the next project, they were going to do their design work in India. They were going to source their module fabrication in China or Mexico. I don't remember where. But they asked us to go in and help support those Scrum teams and support that one team approach and support the interfaces very early on, because they saw the value in it. So,
hey, Jose, just one more thought on that, and Kirk's alluding to it there. Getting the integrated team on time together makes a huge impact on scoping. If you're missing ops in the conversation, because ops doesn't have to worry about it till the actual piece of equipment is commissioned, you're missing the boat on scoping. I mean, if it's just the engineering team looking at it, I mean, you're going to build this big, massive, beautiful that may not be form and fit as the team is talking about. So to get that integrated team, oh well, it's busy and they're doing something else and they've got other priorities. Well, that has a huge impact if they're not together as an integrated team early and often looking at that, so that they can voice their concerns, whether it be a safety concern, environmental concern, or that's not really how it's going to work. It'll work a lot better if we have the equipment positioned this way. So integrated team in on time.
Very good. Gonna propose a challenge here. We have about a minute, so 30-second answers on 2 questions that I wanna fit in here. And Rick, I'll direct this to you. The first one is from Anthony DeCaria, who is with an energy company, and he mentioned you show the dollar savings from the approach as about $75 million on that one example. What percentage of that was savings over expected cost? And do you expect that sort of percentage on all projects with this approach?
Yes, we do expect that type of savings, and it's all over baseline. So wherever they were tracking, those savings are improvement when we started, improvement over that baseline so it's an actual savings, not something they were achieving already.
Very good. And next question comes from Boston here, Arizusabet. Question for you, Rick. On the project schedule, do all project stakeholders, internal and external, such as RLG and contractors, do they measure progress using a single version project plan and schedule?
Yes, that's the ideal. Too often, though, we see owner and contractor have their own version of the schedule, which is incredibly inefficient and really de-optimizes the one team approach. So yes, let's all get on one version. And usually in the contract, it says the contractor version. So you have to ask and trust that you've got the granular truth in front of you. But yes, one version of the truth is absolutely critical.
Gentlemen, terrific presentation, terrific insights, a real demonstration of collaborative leadership, global union here with Pittsburgh, Salt Lake City, and Kazakhstan all coming together. So thank you for sharing your expertise. It's been a real pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Jose.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, so this brings us to the conclusion of the segment. In our next segment, we're going to be bringing in directly from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, Bruno Fuchs, who is the operations manager for MODAC. And Bruno is going to talk to us about knowing your team, especially during a crisis, and how it can save your operations. So he's going to talk about what good leadership and people management looks like in driving operations to the next level in times of uncertainty and rapid change. So we'll see you back here at the top of the hour with Bruno Fuchs and a presentation on leadership in times of uncertainty. So see you soon.